Hello, Summit County. I'm Dave Rossi, Communications Director. Today with me, I have two of our Summit County Commissioners. I have Tamara Pogue and I have Josh Blanchard. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
So today we are going to talk about a few things. Josh, you're going to kick it off with short-term rentals. The county, you guys just passed an ordinance, I believe it was on the 15th, after a long process of public input, outreach, surveys, and what came out of that primarily was related to neighborhood overlay zones. So there's just so we can kind of help the public understand what exactly this means for people who have licenses and for people who live in either of these zones. Take it away.
Absolutely. And just to start the conversation about short-term rentals, a huge appreciation for so many people in our community who came out and engaged in over 20 different opportunities over the last year. Forums, surveys, community dialogues, obviously work sessions and public meetings with the BOCC. So really taking time and taking care to engage the community, receive that feedback. Specifically, what we're talking about today is unincorporated Summit County. The BOCC, Summit County government, does not have jurisdiction on incorporated Summit County. So if there are properties, those properties that are within the town limits of Breckenridge and Frisco and Silverthorne and Dillon, they have their own regulations and their own ordinances as it relates to land use and as it relates to the licensing processes for short-term rentals. So we're only talking about unincorporated Summit County. What does that mean? We've defined through this round of ordinances within our neighborhood zones, 4 different areas that align with the county's planning basins. We have 4 planning basins. So if you think about Summit County as a map and you basically divide it into 4, there are 4 areas or basins that really outline what the ordinance really talks to in terms of what's now put into place. We went in that route because, first of all, we already have the infrastructure in place to support the different basins. Secondly, the basins have different characteristics. So if you're living in what we might consider unincorporated Summit County adjacent to Breckenridge, that's very different than if you're in the Snake River Basin, which is unincorporated Summit County that includes Keystone, right? And so those different neighborhoods may have different characteristics that lend itself to thinking about the types of short-term licenses or particularly the regulations around short-term licenses in these neighborhoods. So what folks can do is they can find out, first of all, what basin they live in, and then what that's going to mean is there are now caps in place that really mirror, in a lot of ways, other areas in incorporated Summit County. Caps in place of when you can get those licenses, short-term rental licenses. And there's also different license types. We still have our license 1 type that carves out exceptions, so folks will want to go and look at what those exceptions are. And then also our type 2 license for short-term rentals. There are what we've sort of identified as contract limits. So depending upon the number of contracts that you have or agreements that you have, that will help shape what your portfolio looks like in terms of how you use your short-term rental license. So our goals around this, of course, was to create community balance or to continue to support community balance and neighborhood characteristics. We wanted a program that carved out exceptions but was easy to understand. And we also wanted to make sure that we're protecting with programs that are able to be enforced. And so those were some of the goals we set out to begin with. And again, through that lengthy stakeholder process, we feel like we were able to identify, what are some strategies and tactics that could work to create that balance or maintain that balance as we move forward.
So resort zones, resort overlay zones, easy for me to say, versus neighborhood overlay zones.
Yes.
Explain what the difference is there. And the 2 resort zones weren't really part of the impact created by this ordinance necessarily. So what's the difference?
Absolutely. So the resort zones are really those areas that have the infrastructure in place already for that high intensity short-term rental use. Essentially, it's the Keystone area and the Copper area. There's a couple of other carve-outs, particularly in unincorporated
Like the
Breckenridge,
Tiger Run RV.
Tiger Run RV,
Yeah,
absolutely.
some places under, right along the base of Peak Gate, there's a little unincorporated sliver,
A little
right?
sliver there,
Yeah.
surrounded by Breckenridge, of course. And so these areas, again, which constitute the majority of the licenses, the short-term rental licenses within unincorporated Summit County, again, this is where that high-intensity short-term rental use really makes sense from an infrastructure standpoint. There's sidewalks, there's roads, there's access to resorts, there's transportation and those kinds of things. So what we're really focusing on is what we would call those neighborhood zones, right? This is where traditionally long-term residents have lived and worked and commuted back and forth. And these neighborhoods are really more rural in characteristic, with their characteristics. And so that's really the difference between the two.
Great. So one of the things that you guys worked very hard to take care of was in this Type 1 license, teachers, for example. Do they have, now we have a night limit or a night cap, which you guys, night cap sounds a little off, but
Nightly number of night limit on number of nights.
thank you.
There you
I
go.
like that one better. So you guys originally had started somewhere around 26, moved up to 30 after hearing from various residents, and ultimately landed on 35, correct?
That's correct.
So if I'm a teacher and I have a home, one of the things that you guys were looking at for me was how do you allow me to keep my home? It's a financial decision, but I'm gone some of these in the summertime, for example. How does this Type 1 license impact somebody who is like me, who has a property, say, on Peak 7, and I'm a teacher and I would like to be able to still pay my mortgage by renting it out for certain nights? Am I still subject to the nightly cap limit, the nightly room night limit, whatever it was you said over there, young lady?
Yes. You are still subject to that limit, but this means, for example, using the teacher who's gone all summer, that teacher can have 35 bookings over the course of the summer, or for other folks, 35 bookings over the course of the year. So if you're interested in renting more nights, then you'll make your bookings longer, right? You could institute a 7-night booking cap. But if you're really trying to, have your property available to short-term rent within a condensed period of time, then you can have pretty much go on the same way you've always gone on. We do recognize as the BOCC that there are a lot of local folks who benefit tremendously from short-term rental income, just like our whole community benefits from short-term rental income. So we're trying to find that balance point that really lets, our tourism industry continue to be supported by short-term rentals, but also for our locals to get that extra income, which helps them be more competitive in the housing market overall.
And this came really by just talking to the public over the course of the past year and a half or so, and working with some industry groups that helped you guys move these numbers up a little bit to relax them.
Yep.
If I have a license, Josh, am I losing my license right away? How does this work for people who already have their license in place?
So if you already have your license in place, you'll continue to have your license in place. These booking cap or booking limits go into effect in basically September, which is when the renewal period takes place. And just to support something that Tamara said, this isn't 35 night limits. This is a 35 booking or rental agreement or rental contract that you have. So you can book it 35 times. And so that means you could do 35 single night stays, or you could book a 7-night limit. You can go more than that or less than that. But the idea, again, is to drive and have that balance. So it's not just the rotating every other night, someone different is in the community. That type of intensity creates challenges.
So for somebody who lives next door to that rental,
Exactly.
might not have the kind of intensity that we heard from folks who are really worried about the intensity of use when they're living next door to a rental in a residential zone. So talk to me about how you guys are going to evaluate the success of this program.
Well, going back to some of our initial goals, we want to make sure that this program rolls out and that it can be enforceable. We want to make sure that it meets the varying different needs, the diverse needs of our community. There are other exceptions in there as well. So, for example, if you have a family property and it exchanges hands within the family, right? We have a lot of properties in Summit County, particularly unincorporated, that have been handed down generation to generation. So we want to make sure that that type of use can continue with the heirs of the property. And so really thinking about, does this prescription work? Are we able to maintain that balance while also supporting our tourism economy, again, that we really prioritized on?
And you guys had mentioned in the course of these discussions that you were amenable to an additional license type when you guys review this in about a year's time or so, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we do know that there are properties in Summit County that really were purchased for investments, the idea being that they're going to be that significant contribution to our economy. We did not address that piece of this, primarily I think because our top goal was just to bring down the intensity of what we have in the community and give our community a bit of a pause. But I do think the BOCC intends to go back and look at some of those investment properties in a year, as well as review all of our data in a year and make sure that the regulations we put in place are really achieving all of the goals that we identified.
You guys have been very clear that this is really about balance and in recognition of the fact that short-term rentals do contribute to our economy. Absolutely. They're very important, and that this isn't about eliminating them, but it really is about just striking a little bit better balance after the past few years with the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So if you're a local or a property owner who's interested in learning more about our short-term rental regulations, we invite you to go to our website, summitcountyco.gov, where you can go under departments, find us under planning, and there is a link called short-term rentals where you can learn a lot more. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.